Well, gentlemen, tell me about your years of service at Chrysler and the family involvement that each of your families have had, and how many generations you represented when you worked at Chrysler.
You got seniority.
Oh, okay. My name is Gene Ingram. I worked for the Newcastle Chrysler plant for 37 years, retiring in 2003. My grandfather worked there during the Depression. My father worked there right after the Depression, all through World War II, and retired in 1968. I went there right out of high school in '66, and I worked 37 years. My daughter graduated from Walter P. Chrysler Memorial High School in '87 and went to work there in '97 after her college, and was there until the end in 2004. So I have a strong family heritage at the Chrysler Newcastle plant.
And my name is Don Davis. I worked there for 34 years. My father worked there before I did, and I had two brothers that also worked, one there and one in Kokomo. So we were spread out. But I graduated from high school. The day after, I went to work in Kokomo, worked 90 days, and then transferred down here. My father worked there for 30 years. My brother worked there for 30 years. So we have a strong history in the Chrysler plant. And I retired in 2001.
I've always heard these stories about kids going to school, walking out the door, as you just said, when you're done with school as a senior, and then going to Chrysler and getting a job. Was it that quick? I mean, you could actually graduate from high school one day and go to work the next at Chrysler?
It was for me, because the day after I went to work at Kokomo, graduated on a Sunday and went to work on Monday.
Pretty much, yeah. I graduated in the first week of June of '66 and went to work on August the 8th of '66.
Was there a job interview of any sorts, or?
Yes, I had a job interview. Lasted about maybe 5 minutes. And then I took a physical, and that was about it.
Pretty much signed here. I'll come to work at day shift Monday. Yeah, if I could pretty much walk and breathe on my own, come on to work.
Yep.
With the family involvements that you guys have both described, what's your earliest memory of the factory? Do you have memories when you were a kid of a relative working there? Did you go to an open house? Tell us about your earliest memory.
Yes, because my dad worked there. I remember, I was very young, but I remember walking picket of the 100-day strike in 1950, and there's pictures of me walking picket with my dad. And then they had open houses, I think in 55 or 56, when they opened a new building. They had a whole bunch of new cars there, and I remember the first time I remembered the smell. And you walk into a factory and that smell pops right in your mind right away. But yes, my whole life has been Chrysler direct involvement. Basically what they used to say, Chrysler will take me from womb to tomb.
Yeah, I remember the same thing. Of course, I was only 2 years old when you but Dad brought us down to the open houses in the 50s and 60s, and to me, the thing that always stuck out to me was, because I grew up a couple blocks away from Chrysler, so I heard the hammers every afternoon and every night, and you'd go to sleep by that hammer. I don't care how big a house you had or how insulated it was, you heard those hammers. And so if we got an open house, we'd go down there to it and we'd spend the day, or spend the afternoon. Several times they had them on Sundays, so they would, after church, we'd go to the open house and spend a couple hours and then enjoy that. But Dad would, he worked for Chrysler. He'd get laid off every once in a while, and he would work for Jennings Lumber Company, and he worked for Consumer Ice when he was laid off. So, you always had a spare job just in case.
Yes, my dad worked at Mount Lawn Speedway.
Yeah.
He was only laid off once or twice that I can remember in my lifetime. But in 1950, during the 100-day strike, there was a lot of guys did that.
Yep.
And that's when he went out to Mount Lawn Speedway, and then he worked out there till up into the 70s.
I have pictures of my dad in Consumer Ice uniform delivering ice, and it was a newspaper article that they printed.
The 100-day strike, tell me about that, what was that about?
Pensions, that's when Chrysler wanted to get pensions for their workers, so if they worked there 30, 40, 50 years and they were no longer able to work, that they would have health care and have a income plus their Social Security so they could somewhat retain their regular working life with the amount of money to come in. That was a big, big step in the UAW.
Yeah, in the video that we did about the history of the shop, you hear one gentleman talking about you would come in and work, and you had no place to wash your hands or to wash up, so the union got wash basins installed and towels. If you didn't have, I remember many times Dad would go to work and then they wouldn't be any work there, so they'd just send him out, and you didn't get paid for it. You went out, you waited till lunchtime, then you came back to see if there was any work, and if there was, then you worked for 4 hours, and that was it. Because that's how he met my mother. My mother worked across the street at one of the restaurants, and they struck up a conversation and started dating, and she took him home to meet Mom and Dad, and they got married a few weeks later. It was a quick ceremony.
And how many years were they married?
Oh, they were married 42 years, I think it was, before one of them passed away.
Now I'm wondering, we talked about the strike. Over the long view of history, the Chrysler plant really, would you say, didn't have that many strikes? Or was it, did things go pretty smoothly over the long haul, or was it touch and go for a while?
I don't think the Chrysler plant had that many labor issues. Yes, there were some strikes, but most of them were national contract strikes.
After the union came in.
Yeah, I can remember a couple of minor wildcat strikes in the 70s and 80s, but didn't amount to anything. It was about, maybe 24 hours long, maybe a couple of days, but it was a minor issue. But I'll have to say, most of us went to school with each other. A lot of our children married each other, but I'm not suggesting any inbreeding. But I mean, a lot of people were related in that plant in the Henry County, Delaware County, Madison County area. So we were a big family, and one of the things that I was thinking about when I was going through your question list, we could fight amongst ourselves, we could argue and fuss, but if Donnie's mother passed away, we were there to funeral home.
That's right.
If my dad passed away, we could put those things aside. We were so family oriented.
In fact, when I came down here, hired in 1967, there were 2 days after I hired in, there was a strike. And it only lasted 3 days. And I couldn't get into the plant and wouldn't go into the plant, but I wasn't union. But they fired me at that time because I didn't show up for work, even with a strike. There's no way I was going to cross the picket line. But they straightened that out within the 24 hours, so I went back to work the next day.
So obviously there was a family feel, a brotherhood.
Oh,
Oh,
obviously,
brotherhood,
there's no
sisterhood.
question about that.
Yep.
Now it's interesting, we're sitting in the Henry County Historical Society Museum, and facing us is a sign that says the Nip and Tuck Country Club, private grounds. And that's a rather famous country club in the history of Chrysler. Can you elaborate a little bit, Gene, on the story behind how Chrysler came to be back when it was Maxwell?
Well, I can elaborate, but I wasn't there.
Neither was I.
I've got it from reading a lot of Chrysler history and newspaper accounts. The Nippacut Country Club was out by what we call the old state hospital. It's called the, what was it called? The Epileptic Village,
Yeah.
back at the turn of the 20th century in the early 1900s. And happened to be a train track run right through the middle of it and within walking distance of the Nip and Tuck. And civic leaders here in Newcastle had heard that the Maxwell and Briscoe people were in Muncie looking for a place to locate a new factory. And they got wind of that and basically went up there. Now this is hearsay, I'm not stating fact, that they basically went up there and got them all drunked up, brought them down to the Nip and Cuck Country Club, telling them there was the best fried chicken in this part of the country, fed them and got them liquored up, and the next morning they had an agreement to build a plant in Newcastle.
Muncie offered them free gas, and we offered them free land.
Mm-hmm.
Is basically what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Because the people bought tracts of land, paid for tracts of land, and then gave it to Chrysler to start the factory.
And you look back at that in terms of Newcastle history. I remember the Henry County historian Richard Ratcliffe said it was when the groundbreaking was held here was the day 4,000 farms became suddenly a manufacturing area, and it changed everything, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I read an article about having tent cities because there were so many people that came up to hunt for a job that they actually put up tents to be able to live in for a while until they built houses.
Now, in your family lines, did you ever hear people talk about those origins of how Maxwell came here, or was it all just through local history?
To me, it was just local history because Dad came from Kentucky, along with the other migrating group. So, and he never talked about the history of the plant, but he was proud to work at it, and he'd always take it to the open houses and stuff.
Yes, they used to send buses down to Clinton County, Kentucky, and bring them up here by the busloads in the 30s. Back then, my dad told me there was a pretty good thought process that we were going to get into that war in Europe. And they built electrical lines, and they added on to the plant, and when it was all ready to go by 1938, 39, they needed people. And they sent the busloads down to Albany and Somerset and Monticello, Kentucky to bring them up.
Which is exactly where my parents were from.
Well, I started to say the reason I'm sitting here today is because my dad, who came from the Albany, Burkesville area, was looking for work, and he came here without mom, and I think I had a sister at the time, and got a job here in Newcastle, got settled, and that's the reason that our family is here, as is the story with a lot of families.
A lot of families, yes.
Let's talk about the war, World War II. What can you share with us in terms of what happened at Chrysler during that time? Stories you may have heard. As I understand it, it was not business as usual. I don't think it was business as usual anywhere in the country during World War II.
That's correct. My dad told me that he was amazed at the quickness of the changeover from automobile parts to weapons, bullets, tank tracks, and things like that. It was like somebody already had the tooling and the fixturing, and one day they were making cars. Next morning they come in, there was other equipment, and they just started making bullets and things like that.
Yeah, they were making those parts for the Beaufort gun, tanks, tracks, but you know, as fast as they changed over, and that was true not only in Newcastle but in Detroit and other places, they changed over to making parts for the war. And I think that from some of the accounts that I read about, the people that were working on the lines figured out, along with the engineers, how to do that in a quick fashion. And that was amazing. I think the higher up people, Chrysler and GM and Ford that did that, they were amazed at how fast they could change it over.
So from a standpoint of what Newcastle's factory produced during the war, it was bullets, and what else? What else did they produce?
Well, they produced connecting rods for B-29 aircraft engines, because at one time this was one of the biggest forging plants in the country. Mm-hmm. So they had the facilities to do things like that. They did a lot of work for the Navy. There was all kinds of stuff that was just military related.
And we have pictures of the assembly of bullets and inspection of them. And then when they tore the building down in 2004, 2005,
Or
they found one of the shells for the Beaufort gun, I think it was. It was about that round, and they found one of those that we'd machined in one of the tunnels.
Oh my gosh.
And so the construction company that found it donated it to the museum. But it's the first time I'd ever seen one of the shells, where we machined it, and they would screw it, put the powder in it, and then screw it, put the charge in it, and then screw it down, and then they could fire it. And it was pretty heavy.
then they made millions of them.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, during that time period, obviously, the production of auto parts, did it stop, or did it just get pushed to the
It
side?
pretty much come to a halt.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
And not only here, but in, in Detroit and stuff, they were making everything for that. And as soon as the war was over with, that work stopped. So they had to do something, so they went back to cars, and that's when the people were buying cars because they had jobs
Mhm.
and they could pay for them. Before, you talk about the Maxwell, you could buy one for $500, $600, $700, but that was a lot of money back then.
Mhm.
And then after the war, you're talking about, anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500 for a car. So it was a big change, but people had the money because war was over with and people were working.
That leads me to this question. When the factory was doing well, and as you talked about, obviously after the war it was doing very, very well, what was life like in Newcastle?
It was fun and games. I mean, you were going to school, your parents were doing good, you had a house, you had a car. Dad was always working on cars, and I think the first new car he ever bought was a 62 Dodge. And so things were going great. I mean, you didn't have any worries.
No, not, after the strike of 50, that kind of kerchunked it. That was 100 days long. But after that, the economy thrived here. Sunnyside didn't exist until that point in time, and then they built the whole Sunnyside addition south of town. Homes in the county, people were buying land. Farmers benefited from the trickle down, and they had farm hands worked here and worked for the farm when the harvest and planting wasn't required. So the economy here in Henry County absolutely just thrived.
We had a lot of workers that were farmers. I mean, they'd work at Chrysler and then they'd go home and farm.
Lots.
Now, if you guys can, I'd like for you to take us inside the plant and give us a sense of what it was like to work at Chrysler. Describe for me the environment, the temperature, the smells of the processes, the camaraderie of the workers. Take us inside the plant.
The smells went home with you. They permeated on your clothes. Because every time I'd walk in the house, my wife would say, "Go take a shower," because I stunk. But the work environment was a whole lot different here than it was in any other plant. Because I worked in Kokomo for 90 days, and up there, it was nothing like here because it wasn't family oriented. People were out to get you. If you were from Newcastle, they didn't like you. So you got the worst jobs. In fact, I was surprised that I worked on the assembly line in the transmission plant, and the second day I was there, a guy fainted on the line, and they didn't stop the line. They just grabbed me off of one of the other lines and put me over there on his job, and I stood over him while he was laying on the ground, and they kept running. Down here, if something like that happened, the job stopped, and you helped that guy. You took him to the medical, or you called medical or whatever, and you were concerned about the person. There, they weren't concerned that guy was laying on the floor in oil.
Yeah, in the 90s, they actually put together some first responder teams down there.
Yeah.
And they worked very well, very well. They were well trained. We had an excellent nursing staff in our medical. I mean, that was just superb. I mean, We had people had heart attacks, people had fingers cut off, feet mashed, and attention was immediate. I mean, it was not mess around. I mean, like Donnie said, everything else stopped until we took care of what was going on.
We had fire brigades. I mean,
Oh
people
yeah, we had
trained,
fire brigade.
how to put out a fire, where the fire extinguishers were. You know, you went out, you might take a half hour off your job and be taken out to training so that you knew how to put out a fire, how to approach it. There was always training going on for first responders, for fire department, for whatever, because they depended on you to help them keep the fire from spreading or keep the accident from continuing. No matter what it was. I mean, people got hurt. I got hurt. So it was an ongoing thing.
Mhm. It sounds like from our discussion today that there's a great deal of pride in working at Chrysler.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It was overwhelming to me how many people really cared about their job because they were so family oriented. Their father worked there, and some of them had brothers working there. That when the slowdowns would come in the 50s, it kind of shook everybody back into reality. And then when the 60s came, how well everything prospered. Everybody had a new car in the 60s, and a lot of people got married there in the late 60s and bought a new house or built a new house. So we knew what we had and we didn't want to lose it. So unfortunately, there was a very small percentage of people that got a lot of negative attention, but people tend to overlook how many million good parts was shipped out every day on that dock and how many millions of cars that were assembled in Detroit because of our parts. So it's just unfortunately that the 10% got the attention and the 90% were overlooked. But very good people. I'm very proud of people. I was a supervisor my last 13 years there, and I'll have to say, with rare exception, overwhelming majority of the people that worked for me were very good people.
Don't you think the attitude changed a lot though when you became a supervisor, and others did too, and they moved up in the ranks because we worked more closely together? I mean, you knew what it was like to work on the floor, so.
Yes, I was on both sides of the table, yes, and I knew what the company wanted, I knew what the working people wanted, and I was a peacemaker a lot of times, even going over into other departments because been there, done that.
Right. I think we all tried to get along better because we all saw what was happening, and, you know, with the oil embargo and everything, we knew that times were changing, but we stayed together.
Mm-hmm.
Even when people got laid off, we checked on them, you know, see how they were.
Mm-hmm. Christmas groceries.
Yeah.
There was at Christmas time, we always went around through the plant and had some employees go out with sacks and gather money. And then we would have hook up with like Marsh's or Kroger's, Harvest Market, some other people. And we delivered hundreds of grocery sacks full of really good stuff, not cheap. Ham and turkeys and rolls and bread and vegetables. I think adjusted for inflation there in the 90s, we tried to give at least $100 worth of groceries to every family that was on the list, a needy family list.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the union people that did it, because Dennis Mason, Jim Robertson, plant managers all got in on it, and they helped deliver the bag, put them together and deliver them, so everybody was in on it.
Oh, absolutely. I remember Archie Frost. He was a big player in that early on.
I remember him too, yeah.
Yeah, and when we helped with the first aid that was given to the
Oh, yes.
town, people saw the need and they wanted to give and they wanted to help.
Yeah, I could recall from the 70s forward that any major fundraising effort, Chrysler workers really
United
needed
Way.
that.
The United Way, oh yeah.
Take me back to, and I'm not sure if this is the case or not, but the Gym Now campaign that built the field house. Chrysler workers involved in that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, Chrysler donated the land for the swimming pool, for the park. So, you know, they gave, we gave as union. In fact, when I changed jobs to training facilitator, Jim Robertson came to me and he said, we're gonna do a project for the United Way and we're gonna paint a house. And he said, I want you to be in on that. Well, they choose different people to do it. It's the first time I'd ever done it. And we painted a house, we put up scaffolding, we did everything, and even Jim Robertson was there painting. I mean, we've got pictures
He
of
was
him.
the plant manager.
He was the plant manager, and he was out there painting the house. Tim Fair, I think, helped several times. It wasn't just the union that was chosen to go do this, but it was management also.
Chrysler had many ups and downs as well as pivotal moments during its life in Newcastle. I guess like any factory, any business, you have ups and downs, and like any family, you have ups and downs and things you have to get through. I'm gonna name some topics and just get your reaction to them. The energy crisis of the 1970s.
You talking about the oil embargo?
Yes.
1975, that was pretty low. They laid off 1,034 people in 1 week.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was
1 week.
Wow, and you were one of them.
We won it.
Yeah.
I was one of the last groups to be laid off, and when I first looked at that, I thought, how long am I going to be off? It's just going to be a few weeks. Well, a few weeks passed, it wasn't. So I went and found a job. In fact, my father-in-law was starting his own business, and he decided that he asked me if I would help him. He lived in Indianapolis, and he did that. So I had to go back to school and learn darkroom work to help him out.
Oh my gosh.
And printing business, he was in the printing business. So I worked at that, and Chrysler calls me back in 6 months, and he says, I think it was Donnie Anderson that called me and said, you gotta show up for work Monday. I said, Don, I can't do that. I said, I need to finish this book. I was working on a book for the National Hockey League, the little guys, and I came back to work a week later, and it was an agreement that we made because of the contract that I could take that extra week,
Yeah.
5 days,
Yeah,
and
5 days to
finish the
show
book, and then come back to work. But you had agreements like that, and people worked with you. I came back, worked 6 months, then got laid off for another 3 months.
The employment, as I understand, at one point at Chrysler was as high as what, 3,500, or was it?
That figure has bounced around. I've heard as much as 4,000 during wartime. But as I remember, in about 77, 78, when they brought in the bumper shock line, it was like 3,200 or 3,300 people working at the local plant at that point in time.
In that time, yeah, but at one time there was as many as 5,000 or 6,000 that was working there because the lines were manned. You did one operation, you sent it to the next guy in the line, and he did the next operation, so you had to have a lot of manpower. In the 70s and 80s, you didn't because the machinery changed. So you had less people, but at one time, we had as many people in there as, like James said, 3,000 people. So it was a lot of work at that time. It seemed like everything was going great then.
And it dropped to as low as I recall as what, 500?
500 to 600, yeah.
Yeah. And as you say, because of the advancements in technology, the machinery, the machines did things that once required employees.
Yeah. In fact, when I came back after being laid off, one of the things that I personally saw, was the computerized machines that were coming in. At that time, it was just simple stuff. But I saw that was going to be the new thing coming into the plant, so I started learning how to do it. In fact, the manufacturer people would come in and they would work with you to learn how to control that machine. And I had an excellent teacher. Nobody wanted the job because it was complicated, because it was computer. So I volunteered to do it, and this guy taught me everything to do it and all the mistakes to make too. And I mean, you program the machine to close the door, turn the water on, spin the machine, bring in tool number 1, bring in tool number 2. And he taught me that if you didn't do the things in right order, then dangerous things could happen. In fact, he had me program it without having the doors open in the middle of the cut, so you got sprayed with water.
Oh, wow.
And that taught me right then, you better make sure that you got everything in right order. Because if you miss something, if you miss a decimal point, you could be in trouble. You could wreck the machine.
Mhm.
And that was one of the things that as I picked up on it, they asked me to teach people. In the 90s, they asked me to teach a class upstairs of 4 people for 40 hours how to basically program a machine. And so we did it on the computers so that nothing got hurt. And then we had a mill that was sitting there, a small mill, and they would have to program. That was the graduation. You had to program that machine to cut a 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch square. And you cut whatever you wanted on it. You could put your name on it, you could put your dog on it, or whatever. And they had to do it without any mistakes. And they picked it up, the basics of it.
AccuStar, when I say AccuStar, what reactions do you have in your mind?
That's pretty much all I got to say about AccuStar.
A change of names is all
Yeah,
it was.
it,
Because nothing
yeah.
changed as far as the machinery or anything else, or the way we did things. It was a way for them to save money by spinning us off into another company that was not really another company.
And when did that happen? Was that in the that was in the 80s or 90s?
Late 80s, wasn't it?
Late 80s.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, late 80s, 90s,
Yeah.
something like that.
But, we got spun off a couple times.
Yeah, we were CBO for a while, and that's when we were supposed to be able to go out and bid on outside jobs, which never happened.
So they told us it would.
Yeah, let's not get into that.
This one is an important one, modern operating agreement.
Mhm.
What can you tell me?
There was a guy here in the union named Noel Blevins that really was the cheerleader for the what we call the MOA. And I have to say, Noel took a lot of heat unjustly for trying to push that through. It removed a lot of the direct supervisor calling some of the daily shots. It gave some authority to group leaders and team leaders. And it really worked well in some areas. Some areas it didn't work so well, but that was a learning process. The MOA was new. But in my heart, I will always believe that stalled the inevitable. I don't believe, had we not took the MOA to heart and instituted down here at the plant, that the plant would have been closed 10 years sooner.
Yeah, I think the attitude was that they wanted to close it, but because we were willing to work with each other and change things, and more efficiently. The MOA was just an agreement that we would work closer together. Because, again, it was one of those things that they tapped me to teach those classes. Well, I had to go learn what the MOA was. And it was not something that we easily accepted. Change is not something that people want to do. And again, you had to have an attitude. People, when it first came into existence, people were against it. But they eventually came around to it, and we had to, because things were changing. We had to change the way operations were and get along better. I mean, even management changed their attitude a lot of times.
Yeah, they sent us management people to a lot of different plants to observe that kind of a work environment. And it was a major change.
Yeah.
It was a major, and some still didn't buy into it to the very end, but the majority did.
The plant, as I recall, received a major award. I remember Senator Richard Lugar coming to town
Productivity.
and presenting a productivity award to the Chrysler plant. I want to say it was in the 90s. Does that sound right?
I believe it was.
What do you guys remember about that, and how did it happen?
I don't remember much about it because I was on third shift at the time.
Uh-huh.
And they came in and did all this, and the next night we found out about it. So I just know that it happened, and they wanted to recognize the plant for the ability to be able to change and make things better.
Yeah, the productivity award basically was how many people did it take to make how many parts, and the Newcastle plant with its resources had a better, what you'd say, a winning percentage than some of the other plants, and that's how we won the productivity. We could pick poor parts or less people.
Now, let's talk about the parts, and from an educational standpoint, teach us, those of us who maybe aren't automotively inclined or know Yeah, we know what Chrysler is, but what did Chrysler produce in terms of parts? Describe the types of parts that were made here and how those impacted the company.
Well, I think Gene talked on the forge side of it, and the machining, the making of the molds and stuff. Dies, okay. Well, it was a mold to me.
Don't call them old.
But anyway, he was more into that. And the machine part, that was one of the things that changed quite a bit because, you had a Detroit lathe that followed a pattern with a stylus, and it would make that part according to what was designed there. And when the computerized machines came in, then you could program it to do whatever you wanted to do. Now, they didn't allow the employee to change the program to such an extent that it would wreck the machine, but they did allow us to make some changes. Kenny Appleby, I know I worked with him, and he set up a way to repair parts on those machines that the engineers never thought of. But they said it was too complicated for a person to do because you were making changes. And yet we could repair parts at 70% good, where before with the Detroit lathes, they were repairing parts and maybe get 30% out of it. So things were changing and we were thinking different ways. But we made spindles, we made, when I first hired him, we made axles for the trucks, double yoke axle, single yoke axle. We made knuckles for the trucks and the cars. When the K car came along, we made the spindles for that. We machined a lot of different parts, ball joints, you name it, we did it. Tie rods, we used to do shocks. And then we depended on the Ford shop to make the part as close to tolerance as could be so that we didn't wreck the machines, because if you had too much stock on it and you tried to cut it off too fast, then you would break the tools. And the machine shop, or the Ford shop, did a good job there for quite a while.
Newcastle was one of the rare Chrysler plants ever, after touring some of the other plants. We could take a raw bar billet of steel as it's backed up to the truck on the east side of the plant at the Ford shop. And we could shear that to the size it needed to be forged, heat it, forge it, trim it, send it to the machine shop, grind it, drill it, counterbore it, thread it, and we could take that blank piece of steel off that truck and send it to Detroit and bolt it on a car at an assembly plant. We were one of the very few plants that could actually do that didn't buy their raw forgings or castings or whatever from another plant. I know we had some guys come down here, I would take them on tours of the plant, and they would say, "What can you guys do down here?" I said, "We can forge, drill, machine, and grind, heat treat, anything you want." And they said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, we used to make millions of wrist pins, piston pins,
Right.
and hold them to 2 millionths tolerance and just spit them out." Because I was supervisor over that line for a while, and it even amazed me the last day I worked there, how does this thing work? Because I never did really figure out the process. And we made wrist pins for years during the war for tanks and stuff like that. And then, like I say, we could forge, we could drill, machine. We had machining centers down there, and Donnie touched on it earlier about we had one man, one machine back in the 50s. Well, this was called a 588 transfer, and it did 23 different operations with two people.
Oh,
With two
Wow.
people. And he was talking about the smell, and a lot of the smell was the lubricants that kept the drills and the tabs and reamers from burning up would turn into a fine mist. And when you went home, you were misty.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it was very common for those of us, we had to stop in the garage and peel off the clothes before the wives would let us in the
Right,
house.
yeah.
Yeah, that was quite
Yeah,
common.
we had chemical people that would go in and fumigate those tanks because it smelled. And they, every once in a while, they'd go in and change the smell to a better smell by chemically.
Mhm.
But, you had people that were working in oil, they were working in a mixture of oil and water. different lubricants to be able to machine, and so that, you know, when you're working in a lubricant, and even on the CNC machine, when you're spraying that stuff in there, you got the doors closed, but as soon as you open it, that mist comes out.
Mhm.
So you had it in your clothes, you had it everywhere. And like I said, when you walk in, your wife would tell you, you need a shower, and you better take a good one.
You know, two other things I just now remembered, we could stamp, because we did the ball joint housings, we could stamp cold metal, or we could forge hot metal. And we also had bolt makers down there. We made our own studs for our ball joints and our tie run-ins, formed them cold, now cold forging, and shaped them and threaded them and drilled a hole in them for the car pin. We made all of our stuff right here.
And at the last there, that was a big machine, that bolt maker.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah, I got pictures of that coming in on that big
Yeah.
multiple wheeled trailer, yeah. But we were so diverse down here. Well, when we were doing the bumper shocks, we were welding tubes and
Yeah, there was a lot of,
we were so diverse
innovation.
at what we could do. We had machines down there called Conomatics that made oil pump shafts, and those were converted like that and made bullets. Very little changeover, and they
Wow.
were spitting out bullets after making oil pump
and
shafts.
do you remember when we had those back in the back of the building, and we had an oil base in it, the
Mhm.
lubricant, and when they'd catch fire, you'd have a big ball of flame that'd go up, and then they'd just keep running working. They put it out.
Yeah, well,
I mean, all it was just a
ball of fire
flash.
is when we made axles.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We could stamp, we made the ball joints, we made our own studs, which was made in a bolt maker, which any company that makes common bolts uses the same cold forging. So, we were so diverse, we could make cold forgings and hot forgings at the Newcastle plant. And some of the people in Detroit were just in awe that you can stamp, you can cold forge, you can hot forge, you can trim, you can assemble. That was another thing, we assembled, sub-assembled some of our parts. We were basically a suspension plant. We probably made an overwhelming majority of the suspension parts for all Chrysler cars for 75 years.
And the steering column he was about to talk
Oh
about.
yeah, then there was the collapsible steering column was pioneered down here at the Newcastle plant. They just put that equipment in when I hired in '66. It was scheduled to go on the '67 model year cars. And they had, it looked like tailpipe tubing, and it was swedged down and tapered. But what they did was to make it collapsible, but so the steering wheel wouldn't slip, inject hot plastic in some of the slots. And it was designed after so much force, if you went forward, it would shear the plastic off. But the plastic was so tough, you could turn the steering wheel and it would never fail on you. And then there was a lever that was welded to the top of that for the gear shift. And that thing was spot welded, and we had fixtures, and we had machines that checked, because you don't want somebody to put the thing in gear and the lever come loose. So, but that little piece of collapsible steering column was a very well-designed piece and a high production. I don't know how many different cars. And they were some like this and some like this for the trucks. That we didn't make there was several models of that, and we had different fixtures and stuff
And
like
they would
that.
change them over in a matter of
Yeah.
hours.
Yeah,
So
and it
we
was,
run a different one.
and the tubing was made on a machine called a yoder, where the steel would come in about 6 inches wide on these huge rolls, and we had dies that would take that thing and start rolling it and then weld it. I mean, we took flat stock and did everything to it until it went to the assembly plant. That was where Newcastle was different than most plants.
And we did that with the shock line when we had that.
Oh, yeah, machining the shock rods and the plungers and, yeah,
Paint it.
welding, yeah, paint it, yeah,
Because I worked on the oil fill, and that was
Yeah.
a stinky job.
yes.
Because you would set the tubes in the machine, it would go spin around and fill it with oil, and then when it came out, it had a cap on it. And so when that would keep it from leaking, so you'd send it down to the next one, and they would check the movement on it. And then you'd send it down to another one that would weld it after it had been checked. And then you'd send it to the paint booth, and you'd paint it.
Didn't do the leak check.
And do the leak check. We let it set for 24 hours on cardboard, so that when you moved that part to another box, you saw where the leak at. And so you'd set that one out to be repaired. So we did a lot of different operations.
And the thing about the shock line always amazed me was all the overhead monorails.
Oh,
There
yeah.
were thousands of shocks like a little assembly line that were in there all the time. There was all
How many
kinds of
times I bumped
monorails.
my head on that line?
Yeah, yeah, that's what amazed me, how many miles of monorail we had in that plant.
Yeah, and there was one that was called, I called it the octopus because it spun around and you slam those things in there, the tubing, and it would weld it, spot weld it, and everything. And your arms would be built up in about a week by slamming that thing in there. And if that's the only thing you did, you had huge arms. Some guys in there made my arms look skinny.
Yes, I was gonna say, the guys in the Ford shop that had to handle the tongs because the temperature of the billet out of the furnace was somewhere between 1800 to 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. And they had these tongs, which we've got a pair upstairs, and just leverage, and these guys would grip them. I remember as a foolish young man one time harassing a World War II veteran who was about, I don't know, probably an old guy back then in my mind. I was 21, he was in his 50s. And I said something off the cuff, and he grabbed me like that, and he said, "Now get away from me." No, that was like a vice. I never got away from that guy. Matter of fact, it pulled hair, and
Oh my God.
yeah, I never smarted off to that guy after that.
I did that one time in the machine shop, smarted off to one of the other guys. And he went and got a 5-gallon bucket, filled it up with water, and when the doors on that Detroit lathe opened up, I got a face full of water, and he said, "You're gonna remember me." He said, "Cause you're gonna know that I don't take no stuff off anybody." And I did. I didn't mess with him.
Yeah, the stupidity of youth.
Yeah, that's right.
So for a period of decades, if I were to buy a Chrysler automobile in California, Arizona, any state in the Union, it would have some parts in it.
Oh,
that were
absolutely.
made
Every
right
one,
here
yes.
in Newcastle.
Every Chrysler had some Newcastle part in it. Yeah, at one time, if it had a steering column in it, it came from Newcastle.
Or if it had a knuckle on it or a spindle on it, it came from Newcastle.
Mm-hmm.
Because we made them for every model, including the Imperial, and when that was in.
And the piston pins.
Yeah.
If it had an engine,
That's right.
it had piston pins from Newcastle.
Yeah, again, talking about the pride factor, that had to make you feel pretty good, I would think.
Yes, it did.
And that was something that management union pushed, to know what part it is you make and where it goes on the car. They would have displays down there showing the parts that we made and where it went on that transaxle, or where it went in the for a while, the transmission.
Mm-hmm.
We made parts for the transmission. They made sure that people knew where that part went on that vehicle and how many we were producing.
A sense of pride is when I would go to an assembly plant, that when I would walk down the line and watch them put the tires on it, watch them do this, watch them do that, but when I watched them put our parts, that spindle, that steering column in the car, that piston pin coming down I could always just kind of break into a smile and say, "Yeah, I had something to do with that."
And sometimes we didn't want to know something that was done wrong. I remember when they first put it in teleconferencing, and the plant manager came and got me and said, "We need to talk to Mexico." And I said, "Okay, what plant?" And he told me, and we set it up. And we had given them a part, and Mexico was telling us that we were making the part wrong. And what it was, miscommunication with the Mexicans and with us in what was actually wrong with the part. And there wasn't anything wrong with it, it was just the way it was made. It didn't, they were putting it on, they wanted to go on quick. It didn't always do that. So there was, the person assembling it was doing it wrong, and we sent videotape to them to show them how it was supposed to be done and how we made the part to fit their specifications. But the communications with other plants was a big thing too there in the 90s. We might talk to Mexico, we might talk to Detroit, we might talk to St. Louis, set up meetings, engineers, plant manager, or whoever needed to be. And so we could communicate. We didn't have to always send people to the plants to see what was done.
That was probably a good thing as the years went by, the ability to communicate
Yes.
improved greatly. Tell me about what you feel about the globalization of manufacturing and how that impacted the plant here. Was that a definite negative or was it a positive?
Well, it's a positive because as the world changes, whether we like it or not, we have to go with what the market wants. I mean, you can make the best product in the world, but if the market doesn't want it. So the global marketing thing, people want fuel efficient cars, they want safe cars, they want dependable cars. And the Europeans had been doing that with some of the higher end cars. And then the Japanese started the flood with the little mini cars, the Honda Civic and things like that. And we were pretty much put to task that we had to start catching up. And we got behind in the 70s. And then in 1980, we almost lost the whole company. And when Mr. Icoca came over, he gave us all a real pep talk and a wake-up call, and we started going to business again. We got a little bit fat and lazy with success in the 70s, and he gave us a wake-up call and turned the company around.
Now you say when he came up, was Lee Iacocca ever in Newcastle?
No, he was not.
No, but we've had Bob Eaton, we had
Lutz. Yeah.
You know, that
We had
came
Jerry
down.
Greenwald.
Yeah. But
So some of the top people in the entire corporation have been in Newcastle.
Oh,
Yes.
Lutz came several times.
yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoyed that because most people looked to him because he was into race cars. He was into flight jet airplanes, and you know, they kind of looked at that as somebody that was a
Car guy.
jack of all trades. And
He was a
master.
car guy.
Yeah.
Instead of an administrator, we looked at Lutz as a car guy.
And that made a big difference, obviously, right? That's
Morale-wise, yeah, I
Yeah.
pretty much do anything Lutz asked me to do, yeah.
for a long period of time, and I don't know, you guys have to tell me if it's true today or not, but this was a town where you saw all kinds of Chrysler vehicles. The town was loyal to the automaker that had the reason for so many jobs in the area. There were lots of Chrysler vehicles in town during those years, weren't there?
Oh, bunch, yes. Police cars, the trucks for the city, yes, even state police cars, sheriff's cars, yes.
We would try to get Henry County to order Chrysler products, but we would, you know, when we had the open houses, we'd show the cars, and the people would look at them and say, you know, that's a good-looking car, and they'd buy them. Now, we had some people that you couldn't change your mind and they were being paid by Chrysler, but they didn't believe in supporting the work. And you have people today in other factories and other businesses that don't buy their own product. My dad, and this is me personally, my dad always told me, he said, if you're gonna live here, when I was in high school, you're gonna buy a Chrysler product. I don't care if it's used, but you're gonna buy a Chrysler product. And I don't think I ever knew him buy anything but Chrysler, ever.
No, my dad certainly didn't. Oh, no.
The only other
Never.
car that I ever owned was an International truck, and I bought it for $100 and fixed it up. And it was I bought it because of the panels, panel truck, but it was an International. And that was the only other odd car that I ever bought. And I say odd because it wasn't Chrysler.
Over the years, Newcastle has been referred to as a Chrysler town. Is that positive or negative?
Well, economics-wise, definitely a positive. I mean, the money that flowed back into this community during those times, I mean, just look at around where the Chrysler plant is today at the businesses that are no longer down. The term trickle-down economics certainly worked well in this community with the Chryslers. I mean, the building contractors built homes, home additions, home improvements. There was a tremendous trickle down in Henry County because of this Chrysler plant.
Well, and it even affected city government.
And
as
city
I
government,
understand, because
that's
city
United
government was
Way.
in a lot
A lot of charitable organizations, the KFC, the Masonic Lodge, Westminster House, Salvation Army, they all benefit,
The
YMCA,
Love Center. You know.
yeah, the Christian Love Center. They're struggling now because of that
United Fund.
Chrysler. United Fund, yes.
I mean, there was one time there that the total donation of Chrysler and the employees reached $130,000, I think it was. So, you know, the town benefited by the generosity of the people in the plant.
And you mentioned earlier, first aid unit.
Yeah. So, you know, we took pride in helping out. We took pride in giving. So, and now look at what's missing now. It's sad to say, but, you know, there's a lot of people back then that said, you know, well, we can do without Chrysler. How are they doing now?
Well, they are doing well, but they are doing, but not so well.
Right. But people liked living in Henry County and donating to Henry County. I mean, look at if you looked at the plant right now, what's the utilities cost now versus what they were when Chrysler was working? Many other things that affected. Newcastle and Henry County had to downsize some.
Bunch, yes.
If I say the word Benaldine, what comes to mind?
A good idea somehow it got jumped the track.
It fell off the track.
Yeah.
Because if you look at, I mean, that's a national corporation. It is. But they took on too much.
They rolled their head a mile.
Yeah. So, you know, it didn't last, but only because they didn't plan well. And
The
they
management
must have it off.
just couldn't put their arms around the family atmosphere. They just, some of the people in their upper level management just couldn't get it.
What is it that you both wish the general public today understood about Chrysler's production efforts over the years that maybe you think they don't understand?
To me, when I watched the video that we did in 1996 of the retirees, it was an hour and 45 minutes, I think it was. But in each one of those, almost 70% of them said, I hope that this plant continues because I would like to see my kids working here. And some of them already had their kids working there. But now it's not possible because when a plant like that closes, when it's done away, opportunities fall off. And, you know, we got out of school, we went to work. You can't do that now. My kids don't work in Henry County or the state of Indiana. I've got a child in Mattoon, Illinois, I've got a child in Indianapolis, and I've got a child in Denver, Colorado, and none of them work for a car company. None of them. So they've gone into retail businesses in order to support their family.
What I would like to say to answer your question about the products and the people at Chrysler, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, that the perception that they were a bunch of lazy, overpaid people is totally wrong. And I'm a retired management guy, I want to make that clear, talking about the working people in the union. I've heard a lot of things about, well, the reason the Chrysler plant is gone is because of the union. That's not true at all. It was a business decision. Some of our components could be bought by outsourcing and cheaper. But yes, like I said earlier, 10% of the people gave me 90% of the problems on the management, but there was 90% making good parts, shipping good parts that cared, and those people just don't get the recognition that they deserve because of the 10% to put a black eye on them.
And last question I have for you guys, what are you most proud of or grateful for in your years of working at Chrysler?
I'm proud of the job that I had. It's not the job that I missed that I retired when I retired, but it's the people. And we still get together once in a while. Today, this morning, was a group of people out at Denny's that was meeting to have breakfast together and just talk about old times and new times and how they're getting along. You know, one of the things last month that I looked at was, or watched, is there was probably 17 to 20 people there, and they talked about each other, you know, how they're getting along, how they're feeling. Because most of those people, like me, are 65 years or older, and you're talking about a lot of them that was in the 80s, in their 80s. And so it's the camaraderie that I miss the most.
I agree with that, and the family atmosphere, as I touched on earlier, that we could fuss and fight amongst ourselves, but if somebody got sick, somebody's house burnt, something like that, someone's mother or father passed away, we could put that on the back burner very easily and comfort each other, send food, help them remodel their house, whatever, go to each other's children's high school graduations and college graduations, and most of the people, and the biggest thing I'm proud of is this community is just full of very good people that I could live anywhere in the United States I want to, and I choose to live here.
No matter where you work, every business, every industry, every group has its memorable people and characters, if you will, that work there, that liven things up, that are eccentric in some ways. Can you guys share some stories about some characters that you encountered during your years at Chrysler?
We didn't have any characters down there, did we?
Oh, wow.
You can write a book.
And I'm saying this not as a put down of these people, I'm saying this in a loving nature. I worked for a guy down there on management named Dave Ramsey, and he had a very unique
Yes, he did.
nickname of Captain Crack, which we won't go into that right now, but I was very fond of that man, and a lot of people liked Dave Ramsey. If he told you to do something, he expected you to do it, and if you did it, he would back you up if something happened. That Dave Ramsey was probably the plant cheerleader, if there ever was one down there, and he was respected by a lot of people down there.
Yeah, I remember when they called him in his office and they were gonna get back a department, the one that made the spindle. Dave Ramsey did not like firecrackers. And they called him in his office, and in the office, there's only one way in and one way out. So they called him back there and they shut the door and they threw in a whole pack of firecrackers. And he beat the wind out, because he wanted out of there. I mean, people were like that. I mean, there were other people that would set you up. Trying to think of his name, Jim. He was a setup man in '86. He did not like snakes. So they brought in a snake on a fishing pole. And when he was walking down the aisle, somebody would signal. And they'd pull that snake across the aisle in front of him. And you talk about somebody going wild. He'd throw parts at that snake. It was a rubber snake. He didn't care if it was rubber or what. He did not like it. I mean, there was things like that would go on, and we'd have fun with it. We'd have Christmas parties. We'd have retirement parties. And as I said, when a person retired, you retired from there, but your friends in your department and friends in other departments would come to your retirement dinner. They'd throw a dinner for you. They'd have a cake. They have a little speech. They'd give you a billfold that was made by Don Cassiter. It was a leather billfold, and he would put your name on it. He'd put your retirement date on it, and the guys in the department would give you money. I mean, they $100 or something like that, or gift cards. And people appreciated it because it was family. I mean, that's what you do with your kids. So there's a lot of characters. As I said in the other one, if you did someone wrong, you might get a 5-gallon bucket of water over your head when you weren't looking. It was never done in a way that you could get injured or anything like
No,
that.
not harmful at all.
But
No.
it was just fun.
No, you might get your ego stepped on every once
Yeah.
in a while, but no blood or, no teeth, hair, or eyeballs, anything like that.
The retirement scenario that you mentioned is interesting because you've got really a pretty big facility, and yet it seemed that even though in fact it was at one time the largest manufacturing plant in the world, and yet you have this close-knit feeling that you guys are talking about. Talk about the retirements and the rituals with retirements a little bit for us.
Well, the one that I found the video of in 1996 was a sampling of what usually went on when, I think it was Mason, Dennis Mason, started it. You would go up to the third floor and they would throw you a party. I mean, they would give, the company and the union would facilitate it. And they would ask beforehand, you know, questions about the people you work with, your family, you know, you'd fill out a questionnaire. And you wouldn't know about it, or wasn't supposed to know about it, but then they'd read these answers off. And it's like in the 1996 one of the guys, Jim Robertson asked him, he said, "What do you do with your spare time now?" He said, "I work with wood." And he says, "Well, what do you make?" And he said, "Sawdust." He said, "I don't have to make anything, I just like to play with it."
I was there that day.
The whole family would come in.
Yeah, that was cool. And Jim and Dennis Mason really liked that.
Yeah,
They had a good time with it. Not only that, as Donnie touched on, but you bring your family in, your wife, your daughter, your kids, grandkids, and all that. And they would
As many
take
as
your
you wanted
picture. Yeah, it was a family thing, and some of the guys really got very emotional that this big company, Chrysler, would allow them to bring their family in and pat them on the back in front of their family and say, "You did good."
yeah.
And that impressed a lot of the guys.
Yeah, and you learned some things that you didn't want to know either.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Jim Robertson, he was kind of a character, wasn't he, as I recall?
well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by character, but he was also another plant cheerleader.
Yeah,
I mean, nobody did anything more of flag waving, jumping up and down, look at us, we can do this, we can do this. I remember Jim had some catchphrases that we never had problems, we had opportunities. We had challenges, but we never had problems. I like that.
you know, I knew him for quite a while because of the job that I had. Because I was, at the last, I worked for Jim Robertson and for the president of the union. And they decided what I did and stuff if I wasn't training people. And I remember that Jim and I was talking one time, and he said that he was from Charleston, Illinois. And I said, "Really?" I said, "My son's living in Mattoon, Illinois." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I know that place." And I told him what he did. He worked for Rural King. And he says, "Well, I go there all the time." He said, "I like their nuts and bolts." But I was over there one time when his mother died. And I was at my son's, and Beverly Matthews called me and said, "Jim's mother died. I just thought you might want to know." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "When is the funeral?" And I went to the funeral. Jim, I was the only one there besides Jim, because the mother had a few friends, and then as far as Chrysler goes, nobody was there. And Jim just kind of looked at me like, "Well, what are you doing here?"
But on the other side of the coin, Jim Robertson came to every funeral of his employees. When my mom and
Yeah.
dad died, he was there both times.
He showed he cared.
Yes, he was at every funeral here in Newcastle. Yep. If he knew you in any way, shape, or form at all, he would show his respect.
One of the things I forgot to ask earlier was about the role women had in the Chrysler plant. There were women workers there, is that correct? I mean,
Oh, I had a lot of women work for me there in the 90s and up to the end of the plant, yeah. The
Before
role,
that, it wasn't that way.
well, World
Because
War
during
II, there were a lot of them left over from World War II.
They
that
came
were-
in from World
Yeah,
War II because of the men going off to
yeah,
service.
I mean,
But I know my mother wanted to, when she came up from Kentucky and my dad met her, she wanted a job in the plant, and they wouldn't hire her because she was, she put in an application, but at that time, there was a lot of people putting in applications. And she worked across the street. But she knew that there were a lot of women in there working from World War II. And she thought, well, maybe she'd get a job. Well, Dad did, but she never did. But that was a good thing for us that she didn't. She's a stay-at-home mom.
But to answer your question about the role, I had probably the majority of the women that worked up in the ball joint line, the wrist pin line, steering column, collapsible steering column line I was supervisor over. They were as dedicated workers as anybody,
Yeah.
especially when we went to the MOA. They really took charge of being team leaders and group leaders and scheduling overtime. And if I needed something, they would come to me and I would get them. But the women that worked for me were major players and were as good of workers as any of the guys that I had working for me.
Yeah, I never had a problem with working
Yeah.
with women. I mean, they were just as hard workers as I was.
Yeah. I mean, they were some that were pain, but I had guys that were as much a
Equally,
pain.
yeah, I'm sure, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I have no problem working with women in factory now, not whatsoever.
Just out of curiosity, what's the oldest person that you can remember actively working at Chrysler? Were there some guys that worked there 50 years?
Yeah, Bumblebee,
Yeah.
oh my head.
And where did Bumblebee work?
Wendell Bertram was his
Yeah.
real name, Wendell Bertram. Yeah,
Everybody had nicknames.
But he was Bumblebee forever. He worked there with my dad. My dad retired in '68, and he was working there when my dad was working there. But yeah, his name was Wendell Bertram. He worked out in the Ford shop, and he got his 50 years in, and he retired. He was waiting for that magic number.
Wow.
I think Leo Moles down in the crib
Yeah, he
got
was
his 50 years in. Now, when we first hired in, there was an age limit. You had to retire at 68. And there were some guys that had 48, 49 years of seniority and really wanted to get that 50 years, but the age limit was 68 and you had to go out the door. And a lot of those guys cried because they had to retire.
Oh.
And they didn't want to.
No, they did not want to. A guy named Marion Grimm worked out in the dye shop, did not want to retire. No. But they had to. I don't know, when did they get rid of that age requirement thing? Early 70s?
No, it was more like the 80s.
Did it go that far?
Yeah, I think it
Okay.
did, because there were a lot of people that I knew that had worked there before I ever came. And they didn't want to retire. Now some, they wanted to retire at 30 years. I mean, they wanted to get out of there because they were farmers. And they
Yeah.
wanted to stay on the farm and do the work out there.
Oh, remember Winfield Strange?
No?
Yeah, I don't know how old he was. Somebody said Moses owed him money, that's all I remember.
Across the Red Sea.
Winfield Strange, yes.
Other memorable nicknames you guys can think of that people had?
This is a family-oriented thing, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, some of the nicknames, they had Mule Lip, they had Weed Monkey, Pee-wee, of course, was a lot of the nicknames down there. And, oh gosh, we were thinking some,
My dad worked in Department 81, the ball joint line, and they named him Dog. My brother,
Oh, yeah.
My brother came into work and started working there, and they called him Pup.
yeah.
And they never did associate me with him. In fact, when my brother James retired, several people asked me, I said, well, there's my brother. And they said, you're related to him? I said, yeah, but I don't tell nobody. But,
Yeah.
they had all kinds of names down there. I can't remember some of them, but you knew most people by their nickname, not by their real name.
Yeah, like Bumblebee. I
Yeah.
mean, it was years before I knew it was Wendell Bertram. Gosh, I know there's more we thought of the other day. Now I can't pull them out of the hat, but
Yeah, I can't either.
well,
We're getting older.
We can share on camera anyway.
Some things you don't want to share.
Well, sometimes.
But it was interesting. I mean, you'd see people and you'd see them out on the street and you'd call them by their nickname.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times we'd be walking, Dad and I'd be walking in a restaurant or a store and they'd say, hey Dog, how are you?
Yeah. I don't know how many Davises were called Dog in this area. I know
Oh,
at
really?
least 3. We can talk about Dog Davis. Which one?
Yeah.
One from Moreland, and one from
Yeah.
Dog Davis. I don't know how that started.
Was it, generally speaking, a safe place to work? I mean, it sounds like that there's a lot of activity going on, and
For the manufacturing process, the Ford shop actually had a really good safety record because you could get hurt out there. You could just
It
put
was a
so
permanent
many,
hurt.
yeah, permanent hurt, yeah. There were a lot of fingers and toes missing. My dad lost part of his left hand as a young man there in the 30s. But up in the machine shop, they had a lot of guards and light bars and things, and the buttons, you had to hit 2 buttons before the doors would close. To answer your question, that was probably, with the amount of manufacturing and drilling, reaming, and machines moving back and forth and up and down, that's about as safe as you can get. OSHA helped a lot. The union was a big player in that.
But you don't want to ask me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And you don't want to ask me.
Yeah.
And then if you want to look at my chest, you'll see the scars from the steam that
Oh
burned
my
me. So
gosh.
I was an
Wow.
accident waiting to happen.
Yeah. But as a whole, after the 60s, when they really started putting in safety improvements, and they had a company safety man, later on they hired a union representative for safety. Yeah,
And they'd
Well-
get really strict about it because they didn't want the accidents.
yeah.
You
The
talk about
beepers
the
on the
double,
fork trucks and
you
stuff
talk
like
about the
that.
double buttons. I mean, that was something they started doing in the late 70s. The light bars were on the new machinery. The CNC machinery had a safety that kept the doors locked until.
Or if the door wasn't closed, the machine wouldn't cycle.
That's right. So there was a lot of different things that came up with, simple things that saved people from getting hurt.
The amount of hours that was put in that plant through the years and the amount of injuries, the injuries were very minute,
Yeah.
very low percentage.
I just stepped them up a few times.
If you guys had to do it all over again, knowing what you know, having gone through what you've gone through with the ups and downs, the joys, the physical injuries that you talked about, the smells, the uncertainty. I was a child of a dad who worked in a factory, and I remember the uncertainty that the manufacturing side had to it at times. But then the good things, as you guys talked about, the camaraderie and the standard of living and all that. Would you do it all over again?
If it was 1960, yes. My grandson is 13 years old, and I have advised him, if there's any way in the world him to get an education, make sure it does not relate to a factory. Not because it's beneath him or anything like that, but it's because of the uncertainty. There's so many companies being bought out by other companies. The days of like Donnie and I and the majority of the people down there at the plant working one place for 30, 35 years, that's not going to happen ever again. So if I had to do all over and it was 1966, yes. If I had to do all over in 2014, probably not.
Yeah, one of the, as being a training facilitator down there for a number of years, one of the things that I ran across was trying to get people to get an education. And ranging for classes in the shop and stuff. And because you need the education. If that place ever stopped, you need the education to be able to go out and get a job. When I got laid off, I went to the first place that I could think of here in Newcastle. And they told me, well, you're overqualified. I'm what? Overqualified. But I had the opportunity to change jobs in the 80s, and I couldn't do it because I had insurance, and I knew that I was going to be called back. But I had insurance, I had good pay, I had 3 kids, and so I stayed where I was instead of taking a chance in helping start a business that would continue or not continue. And even that, the printing business went high tech. So you had to learn new things. Well, you had to do that in Chrysler too. I mean, you had to learn how to do things that you hadn't done before. So you had to adjust to change. But yeah, I would do it again. Would I want my kids to do it? I don't think so, because they all work in retail in some form. Will they get 30 years in? Yeah, they probably will. The jobs that they've got, they're gonna be there for 30, 40 years. Because the business is such that they'll be working. And so I wouldn't want it on them, but then again, if things were different, I might. But back in the 60s and 70s, that was good work.
If you didn't come to work here, you go to Delco Remy in Anderson, Guideland in Anderson, Ford in Indianapolis, Connersville Ford, Perfect Circle right over here, Firestone plant right over here.
Yeah, and my brother went to work for Firestone and then got drafted. Well, the day after he got drafted, he had been laid off at Chrysler. And when he came back from the service, he had an opportunity to go to Firestone or Chrysler, either one, because of the time span. So, and when I went to high school, I took retail sales with Beverly Hankenhoff. And I was training to be in business and be in retail. I thought about going to college. I took a few classes, and I was so busy at Chrysler that, you know, you're working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day a lot of times. And that got old. That's something I did not like about Chrysler, that they forced you to work those hours.
Speaking of forced to work, after I went on management, one of the things that broke my heart, especially since I had a daughter with a child, is when I had to go around at the end of the day and force single mothers who was supposed to pick up their children at school, force them to work over 4 hours. I hated that, because I could relate to it because my daughter worked there and making provisions for my grandson. So I related a lot to that, and that's one of my biggest things that it really bothered me to force some of those single mothers over, and then they had to scramble to get on the phone and get somebody to pick up their kids. I really hated to force them.
The flexibility with that kind of job just wasn't there, was it? Could it have been there?
Yes. Other people could have worked the overtime and helped them out a little bit, yeah, on occasion, and that didn't seem to happen too
But
often.
a lot of those were still working overtime, so
Yeah.
it was hard to adjust family life to that type of work.
Now, the education requirements for somebody working at Chrysler changed a lot over the years.
Oh, yeah.
didn't it?
Oh my
Because-
goodness, yes.
Because when you, back in the early days, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was you really didn't need a lot of education. If you had a strong back and a couple of strong arms and
Breathe on your own.
Yeah, because there was a lot of people that was hired that didn't have an education, and that was one of the
No.
things that I found out as a training facilitator, is that there were people in there that read very little. They wrote even less.
Now, we're not saying they were stupid.
No,
Right,
no, they
right,
were very
right,
smart.
right.
That's right.
Yeah,
In
big
fact,
difference.
I had one guy that came up, that his foreman sent him up to the class, it was a 40-hour class. It was on computers, and he says, I know nothing about computers. And I said, well, do you want to learn about computers? Because I'll start from the basics, and you'll be learning not only about computers and how to operate one, but also how to program that machine. And he says, you know, I'm never going to do that. The general foreman sent me up here because I don't know anything about computers. And he said, I really don't want to be up here. And I said, you tell me you don't want to be up here and you want to go back to the floor, I'll arrange that. And he said, well, how can you do that? And I said, I'll arrange it. So I sent him back to the floor, and he did his regular job. Another guy came up and he said, well, I don't know anything about these computers. And he said, but I would like to learn. I said, that's good. I said, we'll start with that. And by the end of the week, by the end of the 40 hours, he was able to write a program, a simple program, how to make a mill start up and run. He made a part on the computer, and then he designed a brass tag afterwards. And he made a couple mistakes in the brass tag, but I was always watching to make sure that it wouldn't crash a machine. But he said, you know, excuse me, he said, this is very, very interesting. He said, I wish more people would take this. And I said, well, we're hoping they would. And I might train 4 people a week, because that's all the computers that I had to be able to run the machines. run the sample, the simulation. But majority of the people enjoyed learning the basics of that programming that machine to do what you wanted to do.
But besides the technical training down there, we had a lot of classes on sexual harassment,
Yes.
racial relationships, language, proper conduct, and things like that that was never heard of in the past. I can't remember any real serious racial issues down there at the plant. We even had a union guy, it was Bill Chris, that as an hourly worker that addressed those things, and that just wasn't there. Sexual harassment early on when we first started getting women, there were some people didn't like the women coming in there in the 90s, but with proper education, we had to share with some of those guys, this is how it's going to be, that their personal life had to, however they treated their wife and children was out there, but in here, this is how you're going to play the game. And after a few years, that smoothed over pretty good. We were probably all around the most well-trained workforce at everything, fighting fires and racial relations, sexual relations, quality issues. What was the name of the program with the boards?
PQI?
No, the boards where Dave DeKaiser came in and did all that. Oh Christ, that's terrible. But we had PQI programs in
Quality
there.
control?
No. Chuck Sewell was involved in it.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
the charting of the
Yes.
machines.
SPC?
how it runs.
SPC, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Statistical Process Control.
We went
we
through
stop
many
just a
hours of that.
second? Sure. I need to change tapes in that game.
Okay,
Yeah, we went through many hours of that.
yeah. Yeah, there's something where the older guys who were uneducated, besides the computer, were scared to death of doing that. Because, what, I gotta put a chart on a line and,
But most people would easily accept that if you trained them correctly. If you gave them the information, they would figure it out and they would do it. Talk about SBC.
yeah. The statistical process control, a young man, well, first Chuck Sewell came in and a young man named Dave DeKaiser came in and really made the thing blossom. And you had to use some calculations and you had to put some lines on a chart. And basically what that was, if you would measure your part before it got out of tolerance, this machine would tell you you're getting close, you're getting close. So before you hit that out of tolerance, you would stop and have the setup bands, change tools and get the machine. And the quality just went up, the rejects went out the window with the areas that had that. But some of the older guys from areas of the country that were not well educated, but not stupid at all, they had issues with that. And the trainers like Donnie, that there was who else was up there doing training? Safety, Troy Sell and Terry Vaughn and some of those guys up there. Yeah, they even taught us how to work safe. Don't be sticking your hand in there. How to sling stuff if you're trying to pick up a machine. How to
go down into a confined
Oh
space.
yes, safely and not
Safely.
suffocate.
That's
I'm very proud of our workforce down there that we were the most well-trained in so many areas, going back to the forging, hot and cold, and stamping and assembly and drilling and reaming and tapping and injection molding with the plastic on the, we even had big acid tanks down there.
That's
We
right.
coated things so we
Caustic
didn't
tanks.
paint. If you need it done, we could do it. But you couldn't hardly bring us anything in there we couldn't do.
Yeah, and there was many times that I worked in 3470 and we'd clean those acid tanks. And you had to know where to put that, how to pump it out, where to pump it out at. You needed to store it, did you need to clean it? When you clean the tank, how to get into it properly, did you need a mask? Did you need protective clothing? gloves. I mean, there was a lot of things that.
You never went into a tank by yourself
That's
either.
right,
You always
never.
had an outside guy. When you were working overhead on a crane, you had a ground man watching. If you were an electrician crawling around on the bus ducts up there, you had an electrician on the ground that made sure that power was turned off, or if you got shocked, immediately. We just absolutely would rarely let a person go out and work by themselves without someone being there. That's why I say we were probably one of the safest plants in the country.
When I was working in 3470, we'd be cleaning those acid tanks and stuff, you know, and the tube line. I used to get tickled because the partner I worked with was Paul Vaughn, and he would sing country songs. He would serenade me while I was down in the tank. We'd take turns. I'd go down, he'd go down. He was serenading me, and he was operating the crane to bring it down to me so I could put sludge in it and stuff. And he hit me in the back of the head with it. And he says, I forget what song it was, but he started singing to me that song, you know, like Being Hurt, a Williams song or something. And I just kind of looked at him and I said, Paul, what are you trying to do, kill me? No, he said, I'm trying to revive you with the song. We used to get tickled with him so much.
What, you wanted him to give your mouth to mouth?
No. There's a lot of guys down there I wouldn't want out. But, you know, there was times that accidents happened, but most of the time we were trained for it. We were trained what to do and how to resuscitate somebody, or how to, if you got acid on your skin, what to use to wash it off, what to kill the contact with. You know, we were well trained, and we worked with a lot of different guys.
We've had.
I got a kick out of working with Paul Vaughn because, I mean, he died a year after I think he retired.
Yeah.
But I got a kick working on him because he'd sing in a minute.
Yeah. Another thing, we had teams when the AIDS thing was getting to be a big deal, that if somebody cut a finger off and there was a drop of blood, boy, they would quarantine that area. They would come down with people that were trained, I mean, boom, on the spot. And they handled it very well. I also remember that we had steam lines in the overhead that had been there forever, and they had asbestos insulation around them. And when they came in and started stripping the plant of that, the big plastic things, they would also make it like a cocoon, and the guys would get in there with respirators so none of that stuff could get out. I mean, they were very thorough on that kind of stuff.
And you didn't spend much time in a tank or in a quench tank. We'd clean out the quench tanks, and you'd take 10 minutes to work, and then you'd be out for 10 or 15 minutes, another guy would be in there. But you'd help one another, you'd keep everybody on watchful eye, so that nobody got hurt. But, you know, there's a lot of things that we knew what to do and when to do it. The first time that I went to work for Chrysler, a guy actually milled his fingers off on a machine. And the first thing that I could think of was make sure we got that wrapped up so that he didn't get an infection, and we got him to the hospital where we had a nurse and a doctor on staff. So then another time I was on third shift, and a guy setup man got caught. He came in to set up the machine, the transfer, and he actually tripped one of the switches, and the machine came in and caught his hand and actually pinned it in there with the drills. And he was able to reach and turn the machine off, but he couldn't back it out. And I heard him hollering, and I went over, and he was pinned in there, and he actually took 2 fingers off because it pinched him off. But I was able to back the head out to get him out. And I knew that when I backed that out, he was going to feel faint, because when you look at that, I knew what it felt like to do it.
Yeah.
And he started to faint, and I caught him, and we didn't even waste time going up to we went directly to the hospital. We didn't waste time trying to report it or anything else. We called it in from up there. But, you know, people get hurt, you just do what you can to help them.
I remember we had a machine repairman in the die sinking department, and we had a Hydrotel. It was a big milling machine that had a counterweight with big chains on it. and a machine repairman was up on top of it, and he had the counterweight propped up, and he was up there, and he went to fall, and he grabbed the sprocket. But when he did that, somehow the counterweight got knocked loose, and it trapped his hands right around the sprocket like that. And a guy by the name of Gary Williams and Larry Hedrick and myself, there was a guy coming down the aisle in a fork truck, and I said, "Get your fork truck over here. We need you to pick that head up. I got a guy hung in the machine." And as soon as I said a guy hung in the machine, he bailed off of that and he took off. So I got on the fork truck, and Gary Williams guided me up in there, and we picked the head up of that machine to get slack and got that repairman out. He ended up losing the tips of his fingers, but he was trapped.
Could have been much worse. Could have been
Oh,
much
he
worse.
was, and had he been by himself,
Yeah.
but I'll have to say the fast action of Gary and Larry and myself, the guy was out of the machine, and like Donnie said, we didn't call for plant protection. We just took him right up to
You
the
did what had to
the
be
medical.
done.
Yes, and that was common.
Yeah.
That was common.
And we had accidents, but when we had them, we knew what to do.
Yeah.
We were well trained and we knew what to do. And if it meant resuscitating somebody, I'd get somebody else.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just
Well, we had bags of, you
yeah,
know.
we had bags and we knew where the equipment was
Yeah.
kept.
And there were several lives saved from heart attacks in there that people recognized it, got them down on the floor, got the first responders there, and we had a great nurse, Shirley Ellis.
Yeah.
She was, not her name,
Yeah, Shirley was,
Shirley Estel.
Estel,
Shirley
Estel,
Estel.
yeah. The one
She-
before that, I can't remember what her
Yeah,
name was.
Shirley Estel was absolutely the sweetest, best nurse we ever had up there.
As you drive by 18th Street now, it's kind of striking to see the remnants of the old plant that they've left behind, kind of in tribute to all the years and the memories of Chrysler. How does it affect you guys when you drive by it?
The first year or two after I retired, as they were tearing the old three-story brick down, I couldn't drive by it. I could not
There was a
do
lot of
it.
guys like that.
I could not drive by it. I just couldn't.
Me, I was there filming it.
Yeah, but I
Because-
couldn't do it.
And it's just like being involved in the taking out of the time capsule. I enjoyed that. I wanted to know what was in it. I wanted to know how they did it, who put it in, and putting it back in. I was involved in that. They asked me to think about what would you put in that for the next 50 years. And I mean, we put things in there, and I know, just like this equipment here, it's going to be outdated. The DVDs that are in it, the still pictures that are in it.
The
we
flash
sealed
drive.
it. Yeah, we flash drive, CDs, DVDs. We sealed it so that moisture can't get in. We put it in stainless steel so it can't rust, because we saw what happened with the first capsule. But it was interesting. It would be interesting to be around in 50 years and see if they can access that, because the first capsule had paper and books and stuff in it. And yeah, it's over
Right
there.
there.
I mean, you can tell that the weather really did damage to it. But I was thrilled to be involved with that. I enjoyed it.
Oh, well, I was there. Donnie knows.
Yeah, we both videotaped it.
I was actually just seeing pictures of a guy down on his hands and knees holding the camera, because the time capsule came out from the bottom. And when Jim Robertson and you and there were several, I was down there and actually got the moment that copper box fell out into, I don't know whose hands it was, maybe Jim Robertson, I can't remember now. But I've got that film of that, the actual moment it fell out.
But-
And then was back there with Donnie when we put it back in.
Yeah, we took pictures of it, we took video of it, when it was empty, when what size it was and everything, and it was just interesting to me to see what people thought about putting in that. Because we asked several people, what would you put in that time capsule? And they came up with some really good ideas.
Yeah, well, I put a flash drive, at that time, the biggest one money could buy was 512.
Yeah,
And I filled that thing up and it's in there with all kinds of stuff. And my grandson was there that day, as well as Rodney Scott and his son Dawson.
yeah, we got pictures of Rodney Scott, he was the
Yeah.
plant manager at that time.
Yeah, Dawson was there and my grandson Tanner was there, so they're
Paul
in
Niles was
that.
there.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I
Mary Ann was there.
yes, Mary Ann Hughes. But I was just chatting with my 13-year-old grandson yesterday about the time capsule because my daughter is wanting to be there, and especially want him to be there. And we keep explaining and putting things in his mind that you will be there
Uh-huh.
because he will be 53 when they
Uh-huh.
reopen that.
Uh-huh.
And-
What a memory that'll be for him,
Yeah.
if, you
You
know.
know, we don't know what the world's gonna change or anything, you know, is that fixture, the bricks and everything still gonna be there in 50 years?
Yeah, that's when Metaldyne said, yeah, we'll do it. Will Crown do it? More than likely, or
Uh-huh.
whatever company is in there behind Crown, but
Yeah.
more than likely.
It'd be nice if we could know the future, know that everything was gonna be there, and when they opened it, that people will be interested in what's in it. We don't know that. We just did it because it seemed like the right thing to do, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for this trip down memory lane. I certainly have learned a lot. Thank you for your service to Chrysler. Any final thoughts from either one of you?
I miss it.
Well, I miss the people, I so much miss the factory itself. But I miss being able to visit with some of the people that's gone, some of the people that passed. But it's nice, you know, years ago, we couldn't have all of this videoing or things like pictures in digital form to preserve. I just think it's neat that we've got this, but will we keep it? Will the things change so that we go on to something else?
Let me
It's like
clarify.
beta version.
Let me clarify. I miss it. I miss it because of the economic opportunity of the community,
Yeah.
the job opportunities for young people who just maybe don't fit into a college environment. I miss the camaraderie. I miss it.
Yeah. The opportunities is gonna be missed by a lot of people.
And I want to thank the ladies at the library for allowing us to have this opportunity to share our thoughts.